Okay, well, let's get started. People will continue to join us, but I want to get started with introductions. Thank you all so much for being with us today as we dive into cracking the code to B2B recruiting. Oh, I'm not navigating. Allie, will you take me to the next slide? Thank you. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. We will send an email out with a playback of our conversation to everyone who is here now and everyone who registered, so keep an eye out for that. And feel free to submit any additional questions that you have in the Q&A if we have extra time, or if it calls out to the panelists, they will find time to answer it. And we definitely want to keep everyone engaged, so feel free to submit any questions that come up. And I will pass the mic now to our founder and CEO, Anish.
Cool. We'll do some quick introductions here. So really quickly, my background was helping to run marketing and growth for different companies, and then got into recruiting and ended up building an executive recruiting firm. Now we're a team of, I believe, 16 and recruiting for a wide variety of executive roles with a bit of a specialization in marketing and revenue generating roles.
Awesome. I can introduce myself next. So it says here on the slide, but I started my career at Box here in the Bay Area. So started as sourcer, moved to recruiter, and then into management. After about 5 years there, I moved over to Miro, which is where I'm at today. I've been here for about 2.5 years. And I lead a team globally of about 90 to 100. This is even outdated since I wrote this slide. So it's a little bit about me.
I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I am currently leading a tech recruiting organization at a global level between India, Singapore, and US for 6 Cents. Prior to this, I was at Uber, also leading a recruiting team, where I saw the scale from like different divisions, but we were like at a hyper growth pre-IPO, took it to IPO. Over 5,000 employees in engineering. Most of my recruiting experience has been in tech recruiting, and I love doing that.
Cool. So as folks RSVP'd for this event, many of you put in questions that you wanted to be able to ask the experts here. And so we pulled out the most interesting questions, put on this deck. And we'll go through a few of them right here so you can get some more insight. So the first one, what's the number one skill recruiting teams kind of need to develop? And I could probably bucket this into 2 areas. Like, number one, if someone is joining your team and you're bringing them on as sort of a brand new recruiter and they haven't actually done recruiting before, what are some of the things that you sort of teach them at the very beginning of their tenure? And then probably number 2 would be like, okay, as they've gotten more senior, how do you sort of level them up to be able to continue to grow in their career? But I'd be curious, kind of like, as you bring someone on board who doesn't have so much recruiting experience, either they've done stuff in other industries or whatnot, what do you look to sort of help grow them into becoming a good recruiter on your team?
I can go first.
Sure.
So when I'm hiring recruiters that are early in their careers, I'm really looking for the aptitude, right? Like, they've not experienced what recruiting is or the problem areas, but if they have the right aptitude and you throw just situations at them, they can navigate through that. So that's really important to me, that ownership and ability to do that. Communication skills, right? Like a go-getter, ownership. That takes definitely a very important role when hiring somebody who has not done recruiting in the past. As the recruiter progresses in their career, then that's when influencing stakeholders, ability to really take on understanding what good looks like when they see a resume, or how do they look at a resume, how do they communicate with the candidates, right? Like, all of those start shaping up more as they become more experienced in the industry. And yeah, candidate experience has been such an important thing through and through. Do they have the empathy? Because we talk about empathy in the leadership, like empathetic leadership, but having that empathetic recruiting approach, because job search is so critical and such a life event, high stressful for a candidate, like ability to connect with them. That's a really valuable skill that somebody can bring to the team.
Yeah, I totally agree with those points. I think at the very beginning, if somebody's not familiar with recruiting, the ownership mentality for me is definitely the number one thing that I look for, is somebody who can come in and sort of take over and not wait to be told exactly what they need to do, but really have that proactivity and ownership mindset. I would say the number one skill beyond, if they're really getting into recruiting, is sourcing. Unless you work for a really massive company where you have a dedicated sourcer, you're going to need to build pipeline in addition to what's coming through inbound. So becoming a really strong sourcer first as the foundation, and then developing, the further skills. So the only one that I would add that I think becomes increasingly more important the more senior you get is comfortability with data and being able to influence with data. I think what makes you a really strong recruiter, from an execution, being able to have a great candidate experience, doesn't necessarily have a ton of crossover with being able to influence with data. So that's typically like a gap or a skill set that you'll see as somebody gets a bit more senior that they need to hone in and work on. So yeah, that would be one that I feel like I've been coaching a lot of my leaders and senior recruiters on as they progress in their careers as well.
Yep. Thanks for that. And when you're thinking about leading with data, like what are the kind of metrics that you want someone to really pay attention to and consistently influence? Is it more sort of size of pipeline? Is it sort of response rates? Or is it something a little bit more like NPS to understand, okay, did everyone walking through our process kind of feel like they got a good shake and had a good experience?
It's the golden question, I think, right? Of what are the specific metrics that you look at? I think it's always great to have a number of different metrics. And what I would say is, what are you trying to solve for, or what problem are you trying to, identify, or what is the objective? So obviously, core execution. How many people are you actually bringing on board and hiring? What is your offer acceptance rate? I think pass-through rates, when you're trying to figure out why aren't we hiring someone, where are we dropping folks off? I typically wouldn't look at, acceptance rate of in-mails or number of screens unless you feel like you have a top of funnel issue, and then you need to deep dive into those areas. One thing I think is not talked about as much, but is calls per hire. So how calibrated is your recruiter to actually then getting to an offer? So are they taking 50 calls to get to one hire? Then there's probably something wrong somewhere in the funnel. So it's a really quick metric to be able to then diagnose, is there a problem here or not? If you've got like 10 to 15, then you probably have a really well calibrated recruiter that's focusing on like evergreen roles or something like that. So those I would say are at least the main ones, but we also do track candidate NPS and hiring manager NPS, but we use survey tools to help do that. So a little bit less easy to collect unless you've got the right system in place to collect it.
Makes sense. And people actually answer those NPSs as well, which
Yes,
can always
exactly.
be tough to get a candidate to take an NPS survey. That's really helpful. What?
Sorry.
No, go on.
One thing that I will add to that is those are really great metrics. The one other thing is also like on the especially in a startup environment, right? Like you get a head count as leaders, we are expected to head, but a lot of times we see an interviewer capacity bandwidth issues, right? So looking at like really working your funnel backwards and seeing where that interviewer capacity is missing, so that you can actually get calibrated and see where the gaps are.
And what do you mean by interviewer capacity? Just how many calls that they're in meetings and chats with candidates are capable of taking, or what does that sort of mean?
Yeah, so when you think of what it takes for the top of the funnel to all the way to the accept or a hire, there are different drop-offs, right? That's your recruiting funnel. And at that point, you can work it backwards and look at, okay, this is as many hires I need to make, work it backwards and see how many on-sites that are needed. And then that is those many on-sites means those many interviewer hours. And then if you work that into your interview hours, then you have a better understanding of how many interviewer hours you need to go back and have that communication with your clients or your stakeholders so that they are aligned and everybody is working towards getting those hires. It's not just the recruiting team.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would plus one to that. I think especially in hyper growth, because they'll say, hey, we need to double the team. And you can say, okay, great, we have the capacity on recruiting, but do you as a hiring manager actually have the capacity to take that many calls? So definitely plus one to figuring out what the interviewing team's capacity is as well.
Yeah.
That's funny. So when you run into that, like, okay, hey, actually, I've built out my forecast for the year as a hiring manager. I'm looking to bring in 15 or so people in, might be the VP of sales. I want to bring in about 15 salespeople. And then you ask that question, well, do you have capacity to interview that many people? And you both collectively look on their calendar and say, you realize you have 2 hours a week at most free every week. Like, how do you sort of move forward from that conversation? Like, you realize we can't do 15 hires when you only have 2 hours a week available. Is it basically, can you free up more time? Can you delegate that to someone else? Can you actually should you be doing 15 people, and maybe we make this a longer term process to get 15 people in the door, given the time crunch? How have you, have there been anecdotes of how you've sort of resolved that kind of issue? And I love that you bring that out, because something we run into quite a bit, because our direct contact is frequently the CEO of the company, and it's pretty hard to get on the CEO's calendar. And so, yeah, it's something we kind of run into quite regularly.
Yeah, definitely. It opens a different conversation, and it opens it with data, right, to influence. And I have run into challenges where we had to go back and do a whole new set of interviewer trainings, where the team realized okay, we need more interviewers to make this happen. We don't want to shift the headcount. We want to keep that impact. Then at that point, we came up with a solution. Let's onboard more interviewers, created a reverse shadow program to get that going. We got in an external consulting expert to come in and do more interviewer trainings. So yeah, there are different solutions that one can plug in as long as we can look through the data.
Yeah,
okay.
I would say, I think you hit all of the points on the head, right? Of you've got options here. Is it that you want to put dedicated time on your calendar to make room for these? Is it that you want to delegate and have another manager step in? Do we want to relook at, training other individuals, or maybe balancing out these hires? So it's really a conversation depending on what the urgency is, what the business need is, and who's really the expert to have those. So you sort of already named a lot of the options that you would explore in that situation.
Okay, cool. And have you found that to be a good conversation with the hiring managers, or have they been like, wait, hold on, I don't know how we're going to get through this, because I have to take my 35 hours a week of meetings?
Yeah, they've been on board. We saw this mostly on the sales side. So we built sort of a funnel of, okay, if we want to actually make this amount of hires, this is how many hiring manager screens you need to take a week. And there was a little light bulb of interesting. Okay, so probably need to look at how do we get a little bit more dialed in at the very top of the funnel, so that we're only passing forward people to you that are really spot on to what you're looking for, but also bringing in another hiring manager to help break up those screens. So that's what we ended up doing, is really getting very, very clear on assessment criteria and what we're looking for, and then adding a little bit more support so that someone's not becoming basically a part-time recruiter while we hire.
Makes a lot of sense. Thanks for that. I guess we'll jump into the next question here. This is a great one. How do you scale teams while maintaining strong cultural values? Obviously, both of you are in organizations that are very much in hyper growth mode, and you have targets that you need to hit, and probably feel a lot of pressure from hitting those targets. But, you also want to maintain some level of cultural values, and sometimes, quantity of hires does not always hit that. It can feel a little that it works in opposition to maintaining strong cultural values. So how do you approach that situation? What do you do?
I can start with this one. This question, I think, is two parts in that. How do you, as a recruiting leader, ensure that everybody you're hiring aligns with your values? And then also as like a manager myself and scaling my own team, how do I maintain the culture once I've already hired people? So the first part of that, I guess in both, is really just being intentional, have a really clear understanding of what your values are, first of all, and second of all, what do those actually look like from a behavior standpoint so that you can assess them in the interview process. So what we've done at Miro is we actually added a cultural interview. So we have somebody who's not on that team that comes in and sort of assesses. We have key behaviors associated with our core values, and then questions that are sort of predetermined and associated. So you want to stay away from like, do I want to grab a beer with this person or go on a road trip, but more so of, can they really exhibit the behaviors that we're looking for from our values? So I think being very intentional and actually weaving it into your interview process is the best way to do it at scale. When you're smaller, it's obviously a bit easier, but I would say at scale, adding it in. And then for my team, we've basically gone from 3 people to many, many more over the globe. And so being super intentional around how do we, unite 50 people or 90 people to all feel like they're on a shared team. And I think it's just remembering that people are human and having interactions that aren't all work-based. So not starting a meeting, jumping into the topics, but having a little bit of time to actually get to know one another has allowed us to really stay as close as you can be, I suppose, across many time zones, but maintain that same culture as we've scaled.
I love that. And also I remember, I would say a good 10 to 15 years ago, the beer test was so common amongst hiring managers in terms of like, they're smart, but do I want to grab a beer with them? It's like, well, that's not why you're hiring someone. So I'm glad that there eventually became backlash versus the beer test for multiple reasons.
Yeah. You actually said it really well, like it's a multiple prong approach. And it does start with just being consciously aware of what that means. What are those core values? What those behaviors look like? Making it concrete, because example, honesty might mean different to different people. One might think of it as a candid conversation. The other might look at it as just sincere and genuine interactions, right? So, and then managers and the organization and the leader, they play such a critical role because they reinforce those target behaviors at that point. Then managers, employees do look at their managers for directions and approvals. So just simply recognizing, because sometimes we get in the hyper road, we get into this go, and we forget to actually recognize and reward those behaviors. So that also takes critical role. And then during your hiring and evaluation process, being extremely conscious of those behaviors. Are the candidates really demonstrating those behaviors through the behavioral rounds and behavioral interviews? Are they people that you would like to work with? Without by removing the unconscious bias.
Makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I mean, there is a line between, do you want to work with this person, and are they a fun person that you want to go out drinking with? There's definitely, there can be a very differentiating line there. So it's good to, I think veering toward that, would you have a successful work relationship with someone is something that you can dive into with cultural fit. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for both of those. Let's jump into the next one. Is this something that you run into regularly in terms of, as you're both of you scaling, very large and very fast growing B2B organizations, are you considering people with more B2C experience for some of your roles? And if so, how do you sort of think about that in terms of transferable skills? And for example, I'll say for the B2B clients that we work with, they're very, very specific about wanting people who come from B2B more so than B2C, and having that background, which, can be a little bit dismissive of folks who come from B2C and can learn things that could make sense. So would love to hear your experiences on that as well.
I can go first. So in my experience, I have ultimately the fundamentals remain the same, whether B2B or C, right? when we are hiring engineers, we are still looking for the same problem-solving skills. We are looking for the key programming skills, the system design skills. So ability to learn and adapt to the environment definitely becomes very critical when you're hiring somebody coming from B2C to B2B. It is critical either ways, but then it definitely takes even more importance. But being language agnostic is another thing that is super important when hiring engineering in a hyper growth environment. So transferable skills, like you just mentioned, and problem solving, because that is the problem statement that a B2B solves for. Like from engineering perspective, it's not very different, but the scenarios in a B2B can be different for the customers, because each customer might have a different use case, right? And multiple use cases that needs a lot of customization from the engineering point of view to be able to take the product forward with each customer. So now on the product front, like product hiring, like the product managers or UX, now there are some areas where the B2B does play a critical role, because the roadmaps could look different, the UI can look quite different, but core fundamentals still remain the same.
Okay,
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like you are open-minded sort of within your organization, as long as they're really showing some level of aptitude and have the core fundamentals, even if the product or the customer journey might be a little bit different with the products.
Yeah, especially I think if a company wants to scale and they are at a hyper growth, then it becomes really important to open that up a little when a company is small. So it really depends on where the company is in. Like they might need in the beginning some really those key experts, but then as they grow and as they scale, we start like loosening up.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add there. I would agree. I think it's the two places that I have the most familiarity with actually have both B2C and B2B. So there hasn't been sort of a huge differentiation. I think what we really focus on is like, what is really the competency that you're solving for, right? You may say, I definitely want B2B. And I think the follow-up question is like, what experience or behavior from that are you really looking for, right? Is it building like the sales motion? Well, that might matter a little bit more. But if it's just, hey, I want someone who's built a team, or really get specific about what is the competency that you're looking for. And that'll depend on really how important is that background or experience for the candidate.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
Anisha, I would actually flip that from the candidate point of view, right? Actually, from a candidate point of view, actually, it does require a little bit more selling of a B2B product to get them in, to attract them to what we are trying to, when we are trying to hire them. Because a B2C, it's much easier for candidates to get in touch with it. It's either sometimes a product they are already using, or it is a product they have heard about, or like, it is, if impact is important to them, and sharing that with friends and family is important, they can actually show those things. Like, this is what I built, this is what I've been working on, versus on a B2B, that's harder to do. So on the flip side, it's much more harder to sell or to attract a candidate into a company and explain them what our product problem statement is solving.
Makes a lot of sense. So yeah, it's interesting that you want some of these B2C candidates to get excited because they could be really valuable, and especially with something like backend engineering or anything like that, the skills are very transferable. So how do you get them excited? I feel like I do see a shift from, a while ago, people not wanting to take B2B roles because they thought the products were so boring and very enterprisey and slow moving, and it was considered to be quote unquote corporate. And now people are so much more excited about the B2B products. The products that both of you are kind of recruiting for, are ones that are kind of fun and fun to use. And we all go to work and we use software, and we're all kind of like needing to do things that make us feel a little bit more creative at work, make us have much more productive days. And so, yeah, the problem previously of not having actually experienced B2B products and therefore not getting people excited, hopefully it's shrinking. And from what I can say, the business models for B2B are a lot more kind of predictable in a straighter line, where B2C tends to be all over the place. So hopefully, I don't know, have you sort of seen a shift of B2C people wanting to switch over to B2B a little bit more over the last few years? Is, some of the companies like the Boxes and the Six Senses and the Miros are like, no, these are stable businesses with real customers, and like real subscription revenue and all of that is a little bit more stable than the kind of like one-off purchases of, maybe call it like mattresses or anything like that.
Yeah, I think it's also coincides a little bit with sort of the rise and awareness of like stock options as well, and the equity potential is that, the business that typically have higher in revenue, you're getting a lot more equity savvy candidates than that were here, 8 years ago or whatever it was. So that's definitely playing a role. And once you're in a tech company, the tech stack is so expansive. So you've heard of so many other products, right? You've heard of like the Trellos, the Asanas, the X, Y, and Z, because you're using them all at your current tech company. So I think, sort of the proliferation of internal tech stacks have also helped candidates with recognizing brands and being a lot more open to tools they're familiar with.
Makes a lot of sense. Who doesn't love Slack and Zoom all day, every day? It's our lives. So that makes a lot of sense. That's cool. I'm glad that you flip that sometimes you have to come into sell mode, because that's oftentimes what a recruiter needs to do. It's getting the best people excited and showing them why they should work at one of your organizations. So thanks for bringing that up. Cool. Let's jump to the next one, Allie. This is a tough one. I'd love to learn more from both of you. Like, how do you approach identifying diverse candidates? How do you approach, pushing the agenda internally of maintaining a pipeline that's diverse and an employee base that's diverse, which can be difficult because obviously a lot of companies want to keep their employee bases diverse, and the pool of candidates can get thin. So would love to know how sort of both of you have thought about this and approached it, and anecdotes of things that maybe either worked or maybe did not do as well as you were hoping.
Yeah, I think I wish that there was a magic bullet answer to some of these. I'm sure Neetu, maybe you have something super insightful that's worked for you. But I think honestly, just establishing like, what are you defining also as diversity for each team and for each role? So for example, in talent acquisition, it's a primarily, female industry. And so when you're really looking at each team individually, it actually might look differently than if you're looking at diversity within, engineering versus product versus marketing, et cetera. So being, super thoughtful about how are you actually defining what diversity looks like on an individual level, and clear goals. I think for us, it's really around top of funnel. So being super clear about how do we actually get more diverse candidates into the top of funnel, and then focusing on competencies, right? Of how do we actually assess for the skill sets that we're looking for, not the backgrounds of where people came from. And we need to get more diverse candidates into the top of funnel. So partnerships or referrals or leaning on our ERGs. These are pretty basic things. So maybe you have other suggestions, but I think for us, just having the open conversation with hiring managers at the start of a search of what would it look like if this candidate was diverse, right? Is it that they're coming from a different type of company? Is it that you need, different gender, sort of disparity, or what is it in for this particular team, versus trying to what we call boil the ocean, right? Of tackling the entire company at one time. We do team by team.
Yep.
That makes a lot of sense.
You said it really well. The only thing that I will add to that is really start in-house, right? Like see where your current diversity employees are, and see how they can help, and then move into the ERG groups. There are some sourcing diversity tools in the market actually that have also been. They're new. I'm just starting to explore some of them, having conversations with them, and Freedom is one of them. Like there's some tools and events. HackerX, we just did like a HackerX diversity event that was very successful. At one of my previous companies, we have created specifically Rooney Rule problem statements whereby we really focus on the top of the funnel. Once we understand where the diversity gaps are on specific teams, But yeah, and that again, it's a two-prong approach. You can create the pipeline, you can take them through, but then really interviewing them by removing the unconscious bias, having a very concrete scorecarding method, the measuring matrix, like all of that plays a critical role to be able to hire that pipeline then.
I love that. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's a very difficult question, and I've had conversations with people who run, the HR and talent functions at fairly large organizations who have invested quite a bit into it. For example, I had this exact chat with someone who runs the organization for a Fortune 50 credit card company, and her answer was like, nobody's figured this out. Nobody knows how to really make this work. Everyone has the intention from a very positive standpoint of wanting to make their organizations more diverse, and there's no exact silver bullet. So it's fascinating that everyone has the intention, which is important. That's it's kind of step one to actually want to see more diverse organizations. But then what? How do you actually make it a reality? I definitely say so. We worked on an initiative to try to get more and more Black and Latin folks into startups. This was maybe about a year and a half ago, and so we reached out to different communities that we had access to, and got roughly 1,000 or so people to sign up for this list, and then we utilized our connections to share the list around to founders, hiring managers, etc. So the list is still there. If Casey or Ali can drum up the list, can share it in the chat here, and because there's a lot of talented people on that list, and fortunately, a lot of people were interested and checked out the list, and we're actively interested in hiring folks. Unfortunately, the learning was that the only people who were contacted on the list were the ones who already worked at sexy companies and already had really interesting backgrounds, or like people whose resumes were already pretty solid. And so it was the same as we did some surveying. It was the same, 10 to 20 people off of that list who, were already working at your unicorn companies or had that on their resume. And unfortunately, the rest of the folks who went to good schools, had good educational backgrounds, had good professional careers, it just wasn't necessarily within tech or within a popular company within tech, did not really get outreached. So hopefully there's hope for some companies to go out and say, well, you may not have worked at insert whatever popular company right now. You have not worked any of these places, but we got some faith that you'll figure it out. And at a bigger company, there's resources to help people figure it out a little bit more. So hopefully there's some hope that folks will move in that direction and allow people to their organizations who haven't already had like what I call kind of like the pedigree aspects of already working at the hot companies. So we'll see. I'm slightly hopeful, but then also, unfortunately, the results from that exercise were not where I would like to have seen them.
Yeah, we saw the same thing at Box in that we actually invested a bit more in just junior talent, like underrepresented junior talent. So maybe folks who didn't have internships or, maybe didn't have as much experience, but kind of went through, we had basically a rotational program where they came for their spring break. And we sort of taught them like a crash course of what is it like to work in tech business, here are all of the functions, and then offered them, jobs at the end. They sort of did a crash course, and then would be a mini internship, if you will. And so starting also to say, maybe giving people who never have had the opportunity to even prove themselves an opportunity to prove themselves as well. So it's not going to solve the whole problem, but it is, you have to take a multi-pronged approach, as Neetu said, is like, it can't just be all about, recruiting and finding the people who've done the jobs or from those companies, but it has to be, how do you support them internally? How do you give them the right opportunities and support? And then even after that, right, how do you make sure they're included once they are employees? And there's a whole journey, even post hire as well.
Yeah, and if there was a solution, it's kind of that, right? It can be tough to bring someone into senior level roles and sell the executive team with folks who haven't worked at companies and et cetera, like just have a larger learning curve. But there's a lot of there's a lot of places in an organization for folks who have a little bit of a learning curve, but I don't know. I personally think the learning curve is a good thing. That helps people get motivated into their role, and people who've sort of seen it and done it may not feel as energized when they jump into a new role because, that learning curve isn't necessarily there anymore. So we'll see. Hopefully all of that continues to improve.
And I would say also plugging in the talent marketing, right? Like the talent marketing and branding also plays an important role, especially when a company is in its hyper growth mode. It's a startup versus larger companies or companies that are more well branded or have a more recognition in the marketplace for candidates to easily reach out to them versus we reaching out to them. So.
Yeah, that's actually a really great point. I think I personally have very little experience in talent marketing, talent branding. What have you sort of worked on that has helped with that? Is it a function of just making the pages on your website that are career oriented as vivacious as possible and as honest and truthful and transparent, but exciting? Or is it a kind of a function of going out to press, going out to getting the awards of like best workplace, stuff like that does it? Would love any learnings on talent branding and talent marketing from there.
All of everything that you said,
Okay.
and really starting with the employee value proposition, right? Like, yes, it is used across the board, EVP, but and plugging in the diversity, the importance of diversity, that our culture or as a company, why it's important to us and how, what are we doing for an employee experience for not just diversity and inclusion, but also the belonging, right? Like the B part of it, which is a new piece.
That is a new piece. I've really only seen the B at the end of it for, within the last couple of years. So it's good that we're expanding and thinking a lot more. I don't know, just diving a little bit deeper to even understand, and there's more to it. Cool. Let's jump to the next question. So this is interesting. So how do you think through, whether to keep certain roles in-house with your internal recruiting team versus working with external partners, whether it's contingency firms, RPO, or executive search firms?
I can take a stab at this one. It's definitely an art and a science is what I will maybe start with, but sort of the general philosophy that at least I use or think about is when you're hiring, you can solve for two of three things: quality, cost, or speed. Very rarely that you can get all three of those. There's some sort of trade-off that you need to make. And so typically when you need to solve for speed, but you really are, it's some sort of niche skill set that you don't have, or you don't have the right resourcing, it's great to go out into the market and say, who does this, right? Or who can we onboard very quickly that can jump in and help here. But if you have the luxury of time, and you want to help to train somebody in-house and maybe say this is going to be a stretch opportunity, although we don't currently have the expertise, right? The quality isn't there immediately. You can sort of stretch on the others. And then of course there's cost, right? Where are you at in your trajectory, your growth trajectory? Are you in the efficiency scale up? Are you in the hyper growth, spend as much money as possible to grow as fast as possible? So I think it depends where you are in your journey. For us, though, at Miro and at Box, we've had very different philosophies. So I've sort of seen it in both ways. At Box, it was very tight, very efficient of let's do less with more with our internal team and really only use agencies when there's a hiring sprint or something like that. And then at Miro, we have said we need to double every year for forever. So what it seems, but we're in our third year of doubling. And so we have a lot of times where headcount is front loaded to the first half of the year. So that's a better time to engage in agencies or RPOs versus we don't know or we don't expect that this growth will actually last through the entire year. It's just a sprint to build this particular team. Not as great to invest in full-time because you want to be really mindful, right, of not having too much capacity. So definitely an art in terms of when to turn on and off. But I would say, at least for us, focusing on what are we really optimizing for? What do we have? What kind of quality or expertise do we have or not have? And then what is their budget to actually go spend to go do that?
Makes a lot of sense. And I guess since you're an organization now that's a little bit more open-minded toward external partners for recruiting, do you generally see people being more excited about utilizing external partners for maybe more of the volume roles where it's like, okay, we need 15 of this particular function in a fairly short time period? Or is it more so, okay, here's a couple very, or maybe more than a couple, like very specific senior roles, and we want to go find an expert who just, can speak to those very specific senior roles.
Yeah, I think the latter is that it's really about the niche expertise that we maybe don't have in-house, right? Or the super senior searches that take a long time. So we have like 2 C-level searches open right now that are both with agencies. So it could be filled in-house, but it'll probably take a bit longer, right? So we're sort of solving for the quality and the speed, and letting the cost go a little bit on that one.
Makes a lot of sense.
Everything that Sierra said, I don't have much to add there. But yeah, it really depends on the size of the company, the growth projections, the capacity on the team, where the best ROI can be achieved, and then optimizing for that.
Okay, cool. And have there been situations where you've had that discussion internally, like, should we go in-house? Should we use an external kind of partner? And like, what has kind of led you in one of those directions versus another?
Yeah, definitely. So right now we are exploring RPO resources at one of the other, like outside of US locations. And because the recruiting capacity would be just impossible to build at the speed, going back to the speed. So cost is where we are like, okay to flex and get an RPO assigned. Then there are multiple C-level roles that are open right now. And again, building out a leadership team internally for X number of roles. So we have to see, okay, is this something that is a recurring need, or is it like just for this year, right? And then look at, okay, how do we assign those to the agency? So that's what we have done.
Interesting. Yeah. And I guess if it's a couple disparate C-level roles, you may not need the like expertise internally. If you're just sort of, we need 1 or 2 of these wonderful folks, and then, we don't need the expertise, so maybe go externally. That makes a lot of sense. You don't want to build a foundation for something that's not repeatable, or not needed to be repeated. Makes a lot of sense. Thanks for that. Cool. We'll jump to the next one. Yeah, I think both of you discussed candidate experience being really high on your list. Are there any anecdotes or sort of processes that you sort of put into play that have really grown candidate experience? Maybe any rules, like people have to hear back by X amount of days, or anything else? I'd love to learn that, because it's definitely something we struggle with as we're trying to fulfill roles across lots of different clients at any given time. And, truthfully, sometimes candidate experience can go by the wayside versus, trying to get more and more chats going. So yeah, would love to hear any advice on that, and things you've learned that have kind of worked in helping with that.
I can go first. Okay. So I look at it as a candidate management process, right? Like, what does it take from point A, that is being the first representation, recruiting being the first representation pretty much for candidate, unless it's coming through a referral on an agency source. And then what does it take from that first representation or first point of contact all the way to the finish line? And there are multiple touch points, and my rules of engagement and clarity, even the decision trees as to where the ownership sits, what's the SLAs need to be at every step, that has played a very critical role for us to provide just very low hanging fruits, but really high touch environment for a candidate and recruiting experience interactions. That has really played a huge part in making sure that the candidate has a great experience with the company. And through that process, I think one piece that was super critical was the speed, because at every step, when there are SLAs and there are clear ownership as to who is responsible and within what timelines, it makes recruiting's job easy to go back to the candidate and inform them in a timely manner, right? And the expectation from the recruiting team is like the clarity is that that if we are committing something to the candidate by this time, we will get back to you, whether you have an answer or not. Like, it's important to pick up the phone and talk to them and let them know, like, we are in the process. So just very, very simple, small things in the process, the candidate management process, can play a huge role. Like people, like companies do put a lot of programs around it to take it to the next level. But at the size of the company that a startup is, or by during this hyper growth, even these small touch points can make a big difference.
Yeah, we do
I
something
like
very
that.
similar in that one of the phrases that we always use is no update is a great update. So basically calling someone to say you don't have an update is a great update. So rather than going dark and saying, not responding until you have something concrete, we do something called Friday Floss. It's a very silly name, but essentially on Fridays, we make sure no candidates are stuck in the process or in between stages. So we sort of floss the candidates every Friday. So that going into the weekend, every candidate has some sort of update from us one way or the other. And it's actually just a calendar invite on the team's calendar. There's no actual event. It's just like a friendly reminder. So we do the same as Neetu, as no update is a great update. And I think also just really stressing in the onboarding process to recruiters of how important candidate experience is. It's your employment brand. It's the decision maker for candidates. It's the first window they have into the company. And so it's really important to be thoughtful about it. I will say that the bigger your team gets and the faster you're hiring, it tends to be the first thing that sort of slips through the cracks. And so figuring out creative ways to build it into your process so that it's not just an afterthought, but something that's like deeply ingrained into the operations of the team. But it definitely takes something you need to constantly be reminding. And we've just invested in a candidate experience tool. And so really gathering clean data at like every step of the process of what are candidates feeling, what are the gaps that we can be doing better at? Are there certain hot pockets, where maybe some recruiters are stronger than others that we can help to up level and upskill as well.
Thanks for that. Is the candidate experience, what is that, just sort of survey the candidates and see how they're doing and feeling?
Yeah, and it's different steps of the process, different experiences that the candidate has had. So if they reject us, they get a different survey than if we reject them, and different stages of the process have different questions. And so it allows us to get a little bit deeper on, what are we really solving for at each step.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I feel like with recruiting, often you're putting all your eggs into the basket of the candidate that you're most excited about for a particular role, and keeping them updated and keeping on top of them. But if there's maybe like a second, third, or fourth place candidate, they sort of drop off. And so I really like that idea of Friday Floss. We might steal that. And it's fast too. We just really have to email people and be like, sorry, I know it's been 4 days since we last chatted, but we have nothing for you. We'll keep on it. Like that actually doesn't take very long, and it's probably an area that everyone can improve upon. Cool. Jump to the next one. Yeah, I mean, I think Sierra, maybe you joined Box at a little bit of an earlier stage when it maybe didn't have such name recognition. So, we work with a lot of kind of earlier stage companies as well, like Series A, who are trying to get people out of, the more interesting, safer companies. So, where have both of you kind of seen some success in getting people to buy into things that are a little bit more risky?
Yeah, I think the easiest answer, not the only answer, but the easiest is referrals, like referrals. The earlier you are, I would say like 50% of your hires should be from referrals. There's obviously some, bias that comes with that, but at least early on, that's a really great way. You already have sort of, an extra data point on this person's work. And so it's a little bit less risky, but also, leaning into your network. So your investors' networks, your own networks, joining networking events, whatever it might be, but really leaning on referrals. It should be the largest portion of your hires. And then the more senior you get, it then becomes, a smaller percentage, but is definitely a really easy way to sort of get the name out there, where you're not overcoming multiple hurdles of like, I've never heard of you. I don't know anyone who works there. Like, how do I know this is, a great place to work? So you're able to check off some of those boxes just by going into folks' network. So there's, I think, other things that you could be doing, but I think that one is the most important and certainly the easiest one.
I like that. That's great.
Yeah, I don't have much to add there. Actually, Sierra touched upon referrals and networking, which is definitely the first thing to go after when it's a pre-seed or a seed company.
Okay, cool. Yeah, a couple things that I've noticed can be differentiators is with earlier stage, you're just making fewer hires at that point, right? So number one, you can give the candidates you're excited about a lot more attention. And number two, you can unlock the CEO to go after those people as well and be part of the conversation and, quote unquote, woo them in. Whereas, when we're working with like public companies or something like that, it's pretty rare that we'll be able to get the attention of the person who's at the very top to come in, unless it's like a C-level hire. So that part can be really more fun. And for a candidate, it's exciting to get to know that you have access to the CEO of the company. So that's worked really well. Another thing I think I've noticed with earlier stages, you can just break process. Larger companies have a lot of process, and those processes are there for a reason, so that nobody gets a shortcut that other people don't get, and to create fairness. But when you're pretty small, you can have an initial conversation with someone and say, you're great, you're literally everything we're looking for. We're just going to end this interview process right here, and we're going to unlock the CEO, and hopefully they can come and close you after conversation 2 or 3, and the whole process can take 7 days at max. And which is something, at least from our experiences working with some of the larger organizations, they do move slowly, and they do have a lot of processes, and getting to even the right compensation takes a lot of back and forth with finance committees, compensation committees, all of that. And so yeah, it's easier to break process or remove process altogether when you're excited about someone. But you got to get people who are willing to take those risks. That's great. I think we have time for one more. Has remote hiring, I'd rephrase this a little bit. Has remote hiring been an obstacle or kind of a win, overall? And do you see that kind of shifting over the next 6 to 12 months as some companies, I would say the companies we work with right now are a mix of, some of them really want people back in the office, anywhere from 3 to 5 days a week. Others have just remained remote. But yeah, I don't know if that's been a conversation topic with people that you've been interviewing and where that's sort of netted out.
Yeah, I'll take a stab. I would love your thoughts, Neetu, because it's different, I think, for every company. The first of which is there's very few companies that are going back 5 days a week, but there's actually not as many companies as you would think going fully remote. I think majority of companies are doing sort of this hybrid model of a couple days. But I think there's a LinkedIn study where it's 15% of roles are remote, but 50% of applicants are looking for remote. So there's sort of this supply demand discrepancy of candidates really want remote opportunities, but not as many businesses are actually offering fully remote. So there's definitely been a little bit of friction in that when we are offering candidates offers and they're going up against a remote opportunity, we definitely have more challenges. I think if you're going hybrid versus hybrid, okay, great, we're on the same playing field. Let's talk about the role and the opportunity. But when we're asking people to relocate to one of our hubs, or hey, enjoy your work-life balance, of working from your living room to coming in, and maybe it's an hour commute, it's definitely a harder sell. I think it'll be interesting to see the other part of this question, right, is the shift that we're seeing in the market, and maybe the candidate market turning slightly. It hasn't turned all the way, but it's definitely not as hot as it was 4 months ago. So we may see a shift in people being more open just for job stability. But I don't think we've quite seen that turn just yet. So yeah, Neetu, I'd be curious to hear how it's impacted you and if you're seeing a same or different trend.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. People are looking for more of hybrid. They don't want a fully, now they have tasted what fully remote looks like. And they are asking for actually a hybrid environment, because for some people being in the office with some other folks and learning, and especially we have had candidates or new hires who have also declined the opportunity if we did not have other set of employees in the same location. Because they want to be onboarded, they want to be around people, but then not at their own terms, within their own parameters, right? So that hybrid is becoming really important. And the talent reach is expanding. Everybody is competing for talent, irrespective of whatever the location it is. And compensation is becoming more transparent. Like we had 1 or 2 states where now it's important that they list the compensation ranges in the job descriptions. I remember it was 3 years back, maybe, when asking current compensation became illegal, or like, or the candidates actually could ask an employer what is the range for a compensation when you pick up the phone and talk to them. But now it's like it's moving towards the direction of listing it in the JDs when they're posting it out. So I think that will continue to see attraction in other states as well. Like, yes, the market is shifting. It was an extremely hot candidate market. We are seeing some freezes, some layoffs happening, and I think people are just starting to become like more aware that there might be a shift, and being a little careful about just quickly moving jobs. Like, we're just starting to notice that. So we'll see, get to see the trend.
It's the very early cusp, and we are watching very closely to see how this plays out. And I think every day that we open LinkedIn or open any sort of news site, we're hearing about a pretty massive layoff happening. So it's gonna be wild next 30 days at the very least. But it was interesting because it took away one of our biggest, for better or worse, COVID took away one of the biggest things that we were able to do with clients, where when we had earlier stage clients, let's say anywhere from like seed to Series A, the biggest thing I would beg the CEO was, let us make this job fully remote. And my pitch was, look, we'll get you someone phenomenal wherever you want this person to be. But we'll get you like an A++ person if you make this fully remote and you let them work anywhere, because frankly, nobody else is doing that yet. And so you have flexibility. This person doesn't have to have FaceTime with a ton of people. And we were able to get people, I would say, who would have been completely out of reach for seed and Series A organizations, because of their allowance to and open-mindedness to letting this person work from wherever they wanted. And now that's sort of slipping away as like a big selling point, because so many companies are offering that. But yeah, we are seeing more and more of our clients pushing back to office. But to Neetu's point, we're also seeing multiple people saying, I actually want an office as well, because they've gotten sick of just working out of their home, and they don't want to be at a WeWork. And they want to go have that, like New York especially has such a happy hour culture. People kind of miss that, especially if they're like of that place in their life that they really want to go to happy hour with their coworkers 3 days a week. So it's interesting. But yeah, to what Sierra was talking about, we do see most candidates wanting to have that choice of being fully remote if they want to, and maybe having a hybrid office, but they want that choice of how frequently they go in versus it being fairly dictated. So this was really great. I feel like I learned a lot. The biggest thing I took away was what do you call it? The Friday freeze? Was that what it's called?
The floss.
Friday floss. Yeah. That's the biggest takeaway. I feel like that's so simple to implement. This was really great. I learned a ton. And Sierra and Neetu, thank you both for jumping on this and dropping so much knowledge.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us, and great meeting all new people. Anish, Sierra, it was wonderful meeting you.
Absolutely. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank
Same
you.
to you.
Bye.